I think the number one issue is actually capital, right? I think our financing system for small businesses has really broken down in the past, since like the mid 90s, especially when the federal government passed a bunch of laws that made it harder for small banks to compete. What they really did is they choked off an important capital source for small businesses.
Hello, and welcome to Say Hi to the Future, a podcast aimed at highlighting the human side of human ingenuity, clever, inventive, and original thinking. My name is Ken Tenser, curator of Say Hi to the Future and CEO of Spiderworks, a leading business consultancy for mid-market organizations and entrepreneurs globally. With me today is Elizabeth MacBride, an entrepreneur, award-winning business journalist, and an author with deep expertise in finance, technology, and international business. She is the founder of the Times of Entrepreneurship, a weekly web publication covering entrepreneurs beyond Silicon Valley, and has 4 employees with an audience of 500,000. Research from it was used to reshape the federal government's small business aid program and the U.S. Census Bureau's small business reporting policies. With Seth Levine, she is a co-author of The New Builders. It argues that the future of the American economy depends on how well we understand the needs of the people most likely to launch businesses today, women and people of color. Like this video if you enjoy our show and subscribe to our channel. Leave us a comment with who we should interview next. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy the show. Good morning, Elizabeth. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Ken. It's nice to be here.
So you have quite the passion and background with entrepreneurship. What drew you to entrepreneurs and entrepreneurship?
That's a good question. So it was really a combination of, it was a combination of wanting to write stories in the world that matter. And also, I wanted to have a beat that would enable me to look across industries and geographies. And entrepreneurship is that, right? It's a force in a movement that's really global and pervasive. So those two things.
So that's really interesting. Stories that matter. I mean, Say Hi to the Future, we're about passion and curiosity. What matters? What makes a story matter?
Well, for me, what makes a story matter, there are two things really. Stories create change in two different ways. One is what most people recognize as the power of journalism, which is highlighting an issue or a cause or something, right, that changes the way people feel and therefore the way they act in the world. So you highlight, an injustice. A lot of my work at Times of Entrepreneurship and in The New Builders is pointing out that most entrepreneurs are not supported as the elite entrepreneurs are. So there's a real injustice there that hurts everyone. So you write those stories, and they're important because they can sometimes create change. It's actually very hard to do that. And I know that after a lifetime of being a journalist, that getting the word out rarely actually makes the change, right? People think it will transform the world, and it doesn't. Like, people know what they should do and what is good to do very often and don't do it. But sometimes it can happen if you catch the movement the right way. The second way that stories are important, which has grown steadily dearer to me over the years, is that one-on-one, as you're interviewing a founder or people, when they tell their stories, they realize how much they've done. They realize how important they are. I think it can make change in communities and in people's lives to be able to tell their story and share it with the world. So both of those are important. Both of those make stories important to me.
No, that's great. And you talk about sharing stories. I read a couple of your more recent Forbes articles, And I've been an entrepreneur 27 out of 35 years, and I wish I had read these 27 years ago.
Well, thank you for saying that. Yeah.
So I think there's a parallel or a build, if you will. The first one was earlier in the year. Whose voice do you listen to? And then your most recent, women need sponsors, not mentors. And I think as an entrepreneur, reading those, and I think people will glean enough from the title, like, boy, do people ever want to give you what's on their mind, whether or not it's relevant, whether or not it helps you. How do you know who to listen to or spend your time with?
Oh, yeah, that's a that's a great question. You ask good questions. You're a good interviewer. I can already tell that. How do you know who to listen to? I interviewed Azafami once. She's a jeweler in Egypt, a woman. She was actually probably the first woman to learn goldsmithing in Khan el Khalil, which is the market there in Cairo. So she's a very brave and courageous woman. And I asked her a form of this question, and she said, the voices in your own head that come from other people and come from various sources, I think we're all listening to all those voices all the time. She said the one that keeps repeating is the one you listen to. So I think that's one way you tell.
Sure. And you talk about the confidence to listen to yourself. I mean, do you have any insights as to how does one build that confidence? Is it just something that comes with, I don't know, I'll say age and maturity, but they don't always link. But I'll start with that. How's that?
It's funny, as I get older, I feel more confident about like a very small number of things and way less confident about most things, right? You start to know what you know, which is very little. I think actually what Debbie Careau, that's the woman who's interviewed in that article about confidence and women need sponsors, not mentors. I think what she argues is that you should take responsibility for building it within yourself. And usually I think it comes about from putting yourself in situations where you're uncomfortable, which is hard, but that's really how you build confidence.
Awesome. We just ran Say Hi Columbus. It's about human ingenuity. It's a different voice of this. And one of the exercises we do is what I call blind ideation, where nobody knows what they're going into the room to ideate on. Nobody gets to self-select because life doesn't. And to your point, I like making people comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I can't say that comes naturally, but as an entrepreneur, you better learn that quickly.
Yeah. And entrepreneurs do tend to be more confident because I think only because they've had practice, right? I'm not one of the people who believes you're born into entrepreneurship. I think it kind of, you grow into it and you do by choosing to put yourself in situations where you're uncomfortable. It's the definition of being an entrepreneur.
No, absolutely. And uncomfortable and dealing with ambiguity, dealing with the fact that every day will be a different day, even decades in.
Yeah, exactly. One thing I love about being an entrepreneur, and probably what drew me to it to start my own company, is this idea that, especially for women, I think it can be hard to have a strong sense of agency in the world. I think that's something that a lot of women, especially women my age, struggle with. And when you're an entrepreneur, you're basically forced to make decisions every day.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to own them. I mean, they're your decisions, they're nobody else's decisions. Right. And over time, that really does give you this sense of agency, which is increasingly rare today.
Well, and you've built a book around this. I mean, with the New Builders, you really speak to the fact that, well, when you say something surprising off the top, that entrepreneurship in the US is dying, and then you speak to the new entrepreneurs, why is it dying?
Well, there are a lot of reasons. So it's if you look at the stats, it's a 40-year-long decline in both the number of startups, the size of startups, and how their chances of success. All of those things are declining in the United States, which is a big problem because so much of our economy, the jobs come from small and new businesses, and as well innovation of all kinds, right? Not just tech innovation, but all kinds. So that's why we should all pay attention to these big, long stats, which are rarely reported. But the why it's happening is very complex, right? I think what we settled on, Seth, my co-author, and I think the number one issue is actually capital, right? I think our financing system for small businesses has really broken down in the past, since like the mid 90s, especially when the federal government passed a bunch of laws that made it harder for small banks to compete. What they really did is they choked off an important capital source for small businesses. Capital and emotional support and mentorship, right? All that used to flow around communities, community banks, small banks. So I think that's one key reason. A second key reason is that when our country got more diverse, in terms of racially diverse, and also women's power in our societies are rising. So there are more women entrepreneurs. So women and people of color are now the bulk of new entrepreneurs, but they're very disconnected from sources of capital as well, right? The finance system, if you look at it, is one of the most homogeneous industries we have. It's white men, it's very white male dominated, and they just don't have the networks, right? Those two networks don't meet. And then the third big reason I would point to is that at the same time we made life easier for big banks, the federal government has made life easier for a lot of big companies. So our balance between laws that favor big and laws that favor small companies is out of balance right now. It really does favor big companies at the moment.
And is there also a tendency not to build anymore, but to scale and sell? I mean, again, decades ago, pre real tech, if you will, it's probably not a great way to put it. We thought about building long-term businesses, and so many today, and especially around the financing world or the financing play, it's not necessarily looking at longevity, but scalability and cash burn.
Yeah. Yes. And in fact, we talk about this in the book as well. I tend not to highlight it because it feels a little bit more amorphous, but it is an underlying narrative problem we have, right? We've bought into this concept that the only thing that matters is size. It's not even profitability anymore, as you said, it's just size. And that really is a reflection of a particular kind of finance, right? I'm a finance and entrepreneurship reporter. And so my mind always goes to the incentives that the capital system plays and creates. And, venture capital as a financing model consumes so much of our mind share right now. And that financing model is just all about scale, right? It's not about profits. It's just about scale, very fast within 10 years, because that's how long VC funds typically are. But to grow a big business in 10 years is like a very strange endeavor, right? It does not have a lot of resemblance to growing a sustainable business. It's its own thing. You grow it big and fast enough to go public, whether it's profitable or not. And that in turn serves the needs of the investors, who are basically the wealthiest people in our society. So, right? It's a very,
And how do we create that bridge? I mean, earlier you had mentioned, the difference of the divide between entrepreneurs and the elite entrepreneurs. Is that, as I understand, those who have access to the financing or capital, and those that I really want to do something but can't necessarily get there?
I think it is, to a much greater extent than people realize. The difference between the elite and everybody else is just access to money. And in fact, there's plenty of research that supports that, right? Even if you look back at the rate at which patents are awarded, It is, if you're from a wealthy family at the age of like 8, you're X times more likely to then receive a patent 20 years later, right?
Okay.
When you look at the stats, right, the top, um, like an average rich kid in grade 3 is more likely to become a patent holder, in other words, a scientist, a researcher, a tech innovator. The average kid is more likely to do that from a wealthy family than the top 5% from a poor family. Does that make sense?
Yes,
So
absolutely.
we're super disadvantaging the people who are poor in our country. And really, it's increasingly we're disadvantaging even the middle class, right? So that entrepreneurship is something that's much easier if you have got family money, and not a whole lot of people do.
Hmm. So how do we build that bridge? I mean, as you're saying, there's one point is giving the voice to it, but the second is giving the tools, and I'm not sure the power is the right, the opportunity. And again, you're talking about women, people of color, people over 40, who you're seeing as the new entrepreneurs, a rising generation of entrepreneurs, as you will. How do we bridge from voice to opportunity?
Well, I mean, the federal government's one way, and actually Seth and I have a number of proposals that are working their way through various avenues in Washington, D.C., which is like a very Byzantine place. So you never, like, who knows what's going to work there. I think that's one way. There's also an organization called Right to Start, which operates a lot in the middle of the US that's working at a state level. So legislative change is definitely one way. I hate to come back to it is because it sounds sort of like an old saw, support local, buy local. I think we've all heard that message, and I don't think until it, I don't know what it takes to create change on that front. Like, when will everybody start buying from their local business versus Amazon?
Mhm,
People are kind of built for like short-term reward and convenience.
mhm.
Um, but that said, um, the younger generation is different. Generations are different. But my kids' generation seems to really actually care much more about sustainability, being local. They kind of don't buy the bullshit on scale that we
Yeah,
do.
no, I completely agree, and I actually have 3 kids and 3 stepkids, and they're all in their 20s,
Yeah.
and their commitment to, well, I'll say humanity is very much different. And it's a great thing. I mean, when I graduated university the first time, I- are you going to be in business, or went to university, you're going to be in business or doctor, lawyer? Now there's so many foundations, there's so many other places to work, there's so many other ways to commit your life and your passion. And I guess I'm kind of hoping, or I'm kind of betting on that next generation. And it's funny because people talk about millennials, or next geners sometimes in a negative light. And I see the fact that technology has enabled them to speak to people in different parts of the world from a very young age about any topic, and very meaty or weighty topics. And I see them as a great future, to be honest.
I do too. I do too. I think everything has got good upsides and downsides, right? Technology has, I do think it's it brought up these mental health issues for our kids, which are very concerning. But it's also empowered them in a lot of ways, and so that's a great thing. And yeah, every generation goes through these realizations, right? That whatever forms you, whatever environment or institutions are operational in your growing up years, are not necessarily the value system that you have to follow. And in fact, part of growing up is rejecting that value system, right? So we'll see that play out in probably really interesting ways. And
Yeah.
I'm here's one like quick anecdote. I'm a storyteller, right? But when I pulled up and to middle, I dropped my daughter off, she's a ninth grader. And I pulled up to her school and I saw these girls walking in, and they were wearing tights with holes, like all of them. They're like, it's obviously like a trend to wear tights with holes. And I thought, right, they're kind of rejecting, first of all, the image of perfection. They're saying, hey, it's okay to be worn. It's okay to wear old things, right? They've kind of embraced the whole sustainability idea. I don't know. So I just thought that would, like, nobody was wearing tights with holes. That would have been embarrassing in my
Yeah.
generation, right? So these things do change in fundamental
Yeah.
ways. Yeah.
Well, I know I agree. And I mean, that's one thing. I think the other indicator of what we would have called used or secondhand clothing, I mean, online, it's become vintage.
Mhm.
And, you know, again, a lot of, well, kids, 20s and older, yeah, they are embracing vintage. And again, it does go to sustainability, but it goes to a completely different mindset. And to me, again, a very wonderful mindset that might help us save ourselves. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
too philosophical, but hey, it just might.
yeah.
Oh, um, Elizabeth, the times of entrepreneurship, you've got incredible reach very quickly. I think there's about 500,000 people that you reach on a regular basis. You've impacted, certain pieces of legislation of the process already. What drove you, or what made you think of creating that?
Well, I saw an opportunity. I kept reporting on um, entrepreneurs who didn't fit the high tech mold. And I kept seeing that as the tech revolution has gone on and on, it's become more diffuse and less about software. So that many businesses now are like tech enabled, but not a software company. And really, most of the coverage in the world, most of the coverage in the business media now is still so driven by that tiny slice of the
Mhm.
entrepreneurial world that's tech and software. Um, so I just saw an opportunity. And I thought, well, if only 1% of companies in the US gets venture capital funding, 1%,
Right.
but probably like 80% of the media is devoted to writing about that 1%. So I thought there's just naturally got to be a market in the other 99%.
Yeah.
And so that's what I'm building. And, it's okay. I launched on February 12th, 2020, like literally like 3 weeks before the pandemic
Right.
hit, which was, both fortuitous and also an utter nightmare. I just didn't, I had $80,000 in seed funding from the Kauffman Foundation to sort of test it and get it out. So I had this small platform and I thought, well, I'm a journalist, I'm a business journalist. At the time, all the big media were covering healthcare, as they should have been.
Mhm.
But really, the story about what was happening to small businesses was going completely unreported. And so I thought, I know how to do this and I'm just going to do it. So for 3 months, I wrote every story on the platform myself, and also some op-eds in CNBC and by Forbes column as well. And I just pushed out the message wherever I could about what was happening to small businesses. And as a result of that, we did have a big impact. I'm really proud to say that our research in a particular op-ed published in CNBC helped reshape the PPP. The Tim Kane's chief of staff reached out and told me, hey, we
Hmm.
really used that research to figure out what the small business market needed and looked like.
That's incredible. And you know what? Kudos to, I really love, you talk to entrepreneurship beyond Silicon Valley. And I love that. And one of your stories up there now is about a llama farm. I look, I mean, obviously technology is critical and it's a future of business because it supports all of our businesses, but the businesses it support may not be in the business of technology. And I, it was probably about 10 years ago. Up in Canada, I was in a council meeting for a board that I sat on, and we had a high-ranking politician who was speaking about, well, hey, we're not going to support hair, salons or hairdressers necessarily. And I said, why not? said, hey, at that point, I think it was Blow Bar, one of the blow dry bars, was one of the fastest growing businesses out there. And I said, isn't it time? Isn't it
Right.
time that we look at the other 99% and find a way to fund them and to build them, because they are feeding millions, tens of millions of people and homes.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, right. And in fact, there are these scalable models. If you care that much about scale, there are plenty of scalable models. And there's research from the World Bank that says you cannot predict which businesses will become what they call gazelles, right? That
Right.
grow really fast. But it said in retrospect, they can emerge in every sector, not just software and technology. So it's a
Yeah.
total misconception that only tech and software companies become gazelles. So think of how much more economic growth we would have if we supported all kinds of businesses the same way we support tech businesses. We'd have lots of startups that didn't work out, but in these other sectors, we would have fast growing startups.
Absolutely. I mean, you look at clothing, look at leisure wear, look at technical clothing, and on and on. It goes. Elder care, absolutely critical today. So I'm here with Elizabeth MacBride. It's been an absolute pleasure, Elizabeth. You've just co-authored The New Builders. You contribute to Forbes. You've launched the Times of Entrepreneurship. You talk about the changing face of entrepreneurs in America, and I guess around the world. We've talked about entrepreneurs from different countries. What are the one or two things in closing that we really need to focus on to make sure that we get the other 99% that may not be the tech or elite entrepreneurs as described?
Two things. One of them is to re-embrace the value of small, to recognize that a lot of the great change in the world comes from people whose ambitions are just to work in their communities, to employ people, to train people, to turn ideas into reality. That's one. So re-embrace the power of small. And the second thing is make an effort to reach outside your networks. I know everybody listening to this podcast or this radio show is probably a business person. So you have networks, and by the time you're successful, they're great and they help you a lot and they support you. Make an effort to bring women in or bring people of color in. If you're a woman, bring men in, bring men of color in, right? Mix it up more. And through those relationships, I do think we'll empower more entrepreneurs.
Well, thank you for that. And thank you for time, Elizabeth. And I hope that this message gets out. Again, as an entrepreneur for decades now, yes, we continue to be the backbone of many countries. So thank you again for your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.